Hi everyone, Matt here from the Niagara Region Park Interpretive Programs Office of the New York State Parks, and I'm joining you today from an old growth woods. Now as you look around our old growth woods, you can see things like ferns and trees and wildflowers, and we're coming in on September right now. Mid-September's coming up, which is the start of autumn. And once autumn hits, we start to lose many of our wildflowers. The leaves of our trees die back, some of our ferns also die back, and so there seems like there's a lot less plant life to look at. However, there is one plant or group of plants that you can see year-round, so autumn's a great time to start looking for them. And it's this stuff right here. Most people can recognize this green stuff as moss, and that is what we're going to talk about today, the magnificent world of moss. Moss has been around with us for quite some time. If you look back in the fossil record, you can find moss going back 320 million years ago. That's way back in the Carboniferous period, certainly much longer than humans have been around. So it's a very enduring plant. It can deal with a lot of different environmental conditions. And one of the reasons it can do so is it's built a little differently from other plants. It lacks what we call a vascular tissue system. So you can think of that like the piping or plumbing in your house. The vascular tissue helps transport food, water, nutrients throughout a plant's tissues. Moss doesn't have that. Moss is what we would call poikilohydric. You could think of that like you would think of a cold-blooded animal, which we would call poikilothermic. Cold-blooded animals can't regulate their body temperature. They rely on what the environment is like. So if it's really hot out, the cold-blooded animal warms up. If it's cold, it's not going to be so active. Moss is the same way, but with respect to moisture. When it's really dry out, moss is all contorted and dried and it almost looks dead. And that's because it can't transport water throughout its tissues. However, after rain or maybe a morning dew, or maybe it's growing along a creek, the moss can unfurl its leaves. It's nice and green again, and it resumes growing. So it just kind of adjusts to whatever the moisture is like in its environment, which helps it survive in environments that other plants cannot. So moss itself can be a little tricky to identify. Sometimes you can just look at this green stuff here and be able to identify it. For instance, I can recognize this moss as the delicate fern moss. However, sometimes you need a little more power. And with that, you might want to bring a hand lens or a loupe. And so you'll take your loupe or your hand lens, grab a chunk of the moss and put it up to your eye and take a look at all the features. And maybe you'll be able to find a feature to help you identify it. Sometimes, however, you need to bring the moss home and look at it under a microscope. And so what we hope to do next is show you some pictures and slides of some of our more common mosses to help you get started this autumn if you want to take a look at them. And so we'll show you a picture of the moss growing on its substrate, followed by a little clip of the moss under a microscope. So I hope you sit back, relax, and enjoy the magnificent world of moss.